This new team?
Yeah, I feel pretty good. I'm still getting used to playing with my new teammates, but for the most part, it's just basketball, universal sport, so pretty cool.
Is it different though in that?
Everybody saw the hits, the blindside shoves, the elbows thrown in the paint, and the outright disrespect broadcast on national television night after night. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto the professional hardwood, she wasn't just walking into a new basketball league. She was walking into a target-rich environment where veteran players had seemingly made a silent pact to break her down. You could see it in the smirks after a hard foul, and hear it in the passive-aggressive press conferences that followed every single game. The media tried to spin it as standard rookie hazing, telling fans to calm down and claiming this was just how the professional game was played at the highest level. But anyone with eyes could see the reality was far more sinister, and it wasn't just basketball anymore, it had become deeply personal. For months, millions of new viewers screamed at their televisions, begging for someone, anyone, to step up and protect the ultimate golden goose of women's basketball. The franchise was watching their million-dollar investment get battered from pillar to post, and the referees were magically swallowing their whistles every time number 22 hit the deck. The situation was rapidly reaching a boiling point, and rumors started swirling that Indiana was frantically hunting for a permanent solution behind closed doors. They didn't need another perimeter shooter or a flashy ball handler, they needed a human weapon. They needed someone who thrived in the mud, someone who took zero disrespect and struck absolute, paralyzing fear into the hearts of the opposition. They needed a traditional, old-school bodyguard. And what happened next would completely flip the entire league upside down. But to truly understand why this warning message was so desperately needed, we have to look back at the absolute gauntlet Clark was forced to run during her opening months as a professional. We aren't just talking about tough screens or aggressive closeouts, we are talking about highly calculated plays that almost ended in tragic, career-halting injuries. Take the infamous hip check that sent her violently sprawling across the hardwood before the ball was even in bounds. The opposing player responsible walked away running her mouth, utterly unbothered, knowing full well the league office wasn't going to hand down any meaningful punishment. This wasn't an isolated incident either, it was part of a clear, orchestrated pattern of physical intimidation designed to test her mental breaking point. Veterans were intentionally stepping on her feet during dead balls, throwing shoulder checks during routine rotations, and utilizing every dirty trick in the veteran playbook to make her life a living hell. The unwritten rules of basketball dictate that rookies must earn their stripes, but the level of aggression directed at this specific rookie was entirely unprecedented in the history of the sport. Referees seemed almost complicit at times, ignoring blatant flagrant fouls and allowing games to devolve into street fights. The front office of the Fever watched in absolute horror as their franchise cornerstone was subjected to a nightly physical assault, realizing that pure offensive talent meant absolutely nothing if their star player was constantly picking herself up off the floor. The breaking point had finally been reached, and the realization washed over the organization that a massive philosophical change was urgently required. But the roots of this hostility went much deeper than just on-court competition. The harsh reality is that this unprecedented level of physical targeting was born out of a deep-seated, intensely bitter financial jealousy that had been brewing in the locker rooms long before Clark even played her first professional minute. You have to put yourself in the shoes of a veteran player who has been grinding in the league for a decade, flying commercial, playing in half-empty arenas, and making a modest five-figure base salary. Suddenly, a 22-year-old college phenomenon arrives, and the entire economic landscape of the sport shifts overnight. Charter flights are instantly mandated, arenas are sold out across the country, and unprecedented media coverage dominates the daily sports cycle. But the tipping point wasn't just the ticket sales, it was the staggering, record-breaking endorsement deals. When news broke that Clark had secured a massive multi-million-dollar signature shoe contract before even taking a professional shot, the underground resentment completely boiled over. Veteran stars who had won multiple championships and MVPs felt incredibly slighted, believing they had paved the way only to watch a rookie reap all the unprecedented financial rewards. This off-court economic disparity translated directly into on-court violence, turning every single defensive possession into an opportunity for established players to physically vent their deeply rooted financial frustrations. They couldn't touch her bank account, so they decided to test her physical durability instead. The media tried to carefully disguise this jealousy as competitive fire, but the forced smiles and thinly veiled comments during post-game interviews revealed the undeniable truth. The animosity was palpable, and it set the stage for one of the most controversial decisions in the history of women's sports. The true depth of the league-wide conspiracy against the rookie was finally unveiled during the highly controversial Olympic selection process, which shocked fans and analysts alike. Despite being the biggest draw in the history of the sport, leading the league in multiple statistical categories, and single-handedly revitalizing the entire women's basketball brand, Clark was noticeably left off the national team roster. The official explanation cited a lack of professional experience and the necessity of fielding a veteran-heavy squad, but the underground rumors painted a much darker, highly political picture. Speculation ran absolutely rampant that influential veteran players had essentially drawn a line in the sand, subtly threatening to disrupt team chemistry or even boycott the games entirely if the rookie was handed a spot on the roster. It was the ultimate power play, a coordinated effort by the old guard to remind the new face of the league exactly who was still in charge behind closed doors. This blatant Olympic snub wasn't just a simple roster decision, it was a massive, highly public message meant to humble the rising star and put her in her place. But instead of breaking her spirit, this calculated exclusion only fueled the fire, proving to the entire world that the establishment was genuinely terrified of her rapid ascent. The sheer level of gatekeeping was astonishing, exposing the deep fractures within the sports culture and highlighting the desperate lengths the old guard would go to maintain their fragile grip on power. However, this off-court political maneuvering only amplified the desperate need for on-court protection, leading directly to the Fever's front office making their ultimate, highly anticipated countermove. The realization hit the Indiana front office like a ton of bricks. Their current roster simply wasn't constructed for a grueling, season-long street fight. While they had incredible foundational pieces, incredibly skilled bigs, and lightning-fast guards, they lacked the one crucial element necessary to survive in a hostile environment. A true, unapologetic enforcer. Basketball history is littered with examples of transcendent talents requiring a physical bodyguard to do the dirty work in the trenches. Michael Jordan had Charles Oakley to clear the paint, Wayne Gretzky had Marty McSorley to make opponents pay for cheap shots, and Steph Curry relied heavily on Draymond Green to establish a physical boundary that nobody dared to cross. The Fever desperately needed their own version of an enforcer, someone who possessed the sheer physical strength, the intimidating presence, and the absolute fearlessness required to dramatically alter the spatial dynamics of the court. When an elite bodyguard is on the floor, the paint instantly transforms from a free-for-all into a highly restricted, heavily guarded area. Opposing players suddenly think twice about throwing a stray elbow or leaving their foot under a jump shooter, knowing that any cheap shot will be met with immediate, ruthless, and physically punishing retaliation. The front office knew that if they didn't quickly address this glaring weakness, they were basically committing professional malpractice, leaving dollar asset completely exposed to the wolves. The search for the ultimate equalizer began, and the rumors of a massive, culture-shifting acquisition started circulating through the league's deeply connected underground networks. The time for playing nice had officially come to an end. The warning message didn't arrive quietly, it echoed violently through the locker rooms, practice facilities, and media scrums across the entire country when the Hines-Allen narrative officially exploded onto the scene. For weeks, intense speculations had been brewing about secret meetings, urgent front office maneuvers, and a desperate desire to inject pure, unadulterated toughness into the Indiana lineup. The WNBA is an incredibly small, tightly knit community where secrets rarely stay hidden for long, and the whispers regarding a major philosophical shift were getting louder by the day. When you bring a player with the sheer physical dominance, the unapologetic aggression, and the elite rebounding prowess of a Hines-Allen archetype into the mix, you aren't just adding a player to your roster, you are fundamentally changing the entire identity of your franchise. The message sent to the rest of the league was unmistakable, heavily bolded, and permanently underlined. The era of getting free, consequence-free shots on number 22 was officially over, permanently closed for business. If any opposing player wanted to test the rookie moving forward, they were going to have to physically go through a relentless, punishing brick wall to do it. This monumental shift wasn't just about playing tougher defense or grabbing a few extra rebounds, it was about establishing a permanent physical boundary that no opponent would ever dare cross without expecting immediate, severe retaliation. The dynamic completely altered the psychological warfare of the game, forcing the established veterans to completely rethink their aggressive strategies. And what happened next would send absolute shockwaves through the very foundation of the sport. When the reality of this newly established bodyguard dynamic finally materialized on the hardwood, it sent an immediate, paralyzing panic through the established veteran cliques, who had grown entirely too comfortable with their bullying tactics. Players who had previously been padding their defensive highlight reels with cheap, unwarranted shots suddenly realized that the fundamental rules of engagement had been completely rewritten overnight. You could literally see the hesitation in their eyes during the very first quarter of action. Players who used to boldly step into Clark's landing space were suddenly pulling back, constantly looking over their shoulders to see where the enforcer was positioned on the floor. The psychological impact was absolutely massive, instantly relieving the immense physical pressure that had been slowly crushing the rookie for months. It wasn't just about the physical hits being deterred, it was about the newly found mental freedom that allowed the young star to finally play her game without the constant, draining fear of a season-ending cheap shot. The whispers in the opposing locker rooms quickly shifted from arrogant plotting to genuine concern, as coaches frantically tried to adjust their defensive schemes to account for this newly introduced element of extreme physical danger. The established hierarchy of the league was crumbling right before their eyes, and the veterans who had spent the entire summer trying to break the rookie's spirit were suddenly the ones being forced to retreat. The balance of power had violently shifted, but the long-term consequences of this dramatic escalation were still waiting to be fully realized. This sudden influx of protective physicality essentially forced the entire league office to carefully re-evaluate their notoriously lenient stance on hard fouls and aggressive defensive tactics. For months, the league had seemingly turned a blind eye to the targeted harassment, happily reaping the benefits of the massive television ratings while ignoring the incredibly dangerous environment they were actively cultivating. But the arrival of a true enforcer meant that the potential for an all-out, nationally televised brawl had